Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're getting into the next Winter War video. Let's get into it.
In the north, General Viliotwompo had only one mission: to assemble his scarce forces and mount a defensive line in the huge 800-kilometer-long border that runs from Lieksa in the south to Petsamo on the Barents Sea. The Soviets meanwhile had two objectives: to cut off Finland from its border with Sweden by seizing the important port of Oulu in the Gulf of Bothnia, and to take the strategic port of Petsamo on the Barents Sea and then advance on to Rovaniemi. The Soviet 9th Army of Commander Mikhail Dukhanov was in charge of the offensive against Oulu, but the only road accessible for the Soviets led first to the village of Suomussalmi. The town would first have to be taken if Dukhanov wanted to ever reach the coast of Bothnia. At dawn on November 30th, 1939, the 163rd Motor Rifle Division advanced near the hamlet of Lonka. The commander of the division, Andriy Zelentsev, divided his forces for a two-pronged attack on Suomussalmi, with the 759th Regiment advancing through the Rate Road and the 81st and 662nd Regiments advancing towards Palovaara. But at Yundisranta, Zelentsev lost control of the 662nd, led by Colonel Sharov, which struck north towards Haapavaara, leaving only the 81st to attack Suomussalmi from the north. Meanwhile, the 759th encountered the Finnish 15th Battalion at the Pareksenjoki River. The Soviets assaulted the defensive line on the frozen river several times, but were repelled. On December 3rd, the Soviets managed to encircle the defensive positions, forcing the Finns to retreat. Failing to notice that their foe had retreated, the Red Army waited a full day for their artillery to arrive, and then another day to bombard the now deserted defensive line. Further south, the elite 54th Mountain Rifle Division was sent to advance towards the town of Kumo in a pincer movement against Suomussalmi. The town was defended by the 25th Regiment, which managed to stop the Soviet advance by conducting guerrilla attacks. At Suomussalmi, only a small force defended the town, as the Finns didn't think that the Soviets would invade through the vast virgin forests of central Finland. The overwhelmed Finns held out against the 81st's attack until December 7th, when they finally decided to retreat towards the south side of Lake Käntäjärvi. Suomussalmi was put to the torch before the withdrawal, as the Finns didn't want their enemies to get the town's resources. The following day, the 759th reached the town from the south and regrouped with the 81st. Despite their initial success, Zelentsev had suffered many casualties due to Finnish resistance and frostbite, and now his forces were dwindling. At the same time, Colonel Hjalmar Salasvuo took command of the disparate Finnish forces scattered in the Suomussalmi area and regrouped them into Task Force Salasvuo. Their objective was to take back the key town of Suomussalmi. On December 11th, the Finns started their counter-offensive, severing the invaders' line of communication from Rate on December 13th and cutting their northwestern supply route 2 days later. The Soviets wouldn't sit idly by waiting. Zelentsev attempted to repel the Finnish forces, but he was pushed back to Suomussalmi. And from the east, Dukhanov sent the 44th Rifle Division to reinforce Zelentsev, although the forward elements of this division were also repelled by the resilient Finns on the Rate Road, led by Colonel Johan Mäkiniemi. But Salasvuo was also struggling with holding down the northwestern route, and his attacks into the village were failing as well. By the night of December 18th, Salasvuo decided to pull back, although he nevertheless kept sending small forces to disrupt Soviet preparations. On the Rate Road, Salasvuo reinforced Mäkiniemi's forces with one howitzer and a machine gun company. From the 17th to the 24th of December, the Finns defended their control of the road with 350 men against an overwhelming 14,000 soldiers from the 44th. These soldiers were elite, but they had been demoralized by...
That is insanity, right? When you see the difference in numbers of men all across the front here throughout the war, it is bizarre. I mean, it is really bizarre to see how few men are fighting on the Finnish side in comparison to the Soviet side. And when you see the death tally and the wounded at the end of the war or later on in the conflict, it's even more bizarre. I mean, the numbers are so great on the Soviet side that it really is hard to comprehend with the type of military power that Finland was.
By the Finn terror, so despite their numerical advantage, they couldn't break the position of Task Force Selasvuo. Trapped in Suomussalmi, Zelentsev knew that the situation was unbearable. Having lost 1,500 men, the commander asked the Soviet High Command permission to retreat, but he was denied, as they believed the 44th was finally approaching. Meanwhile, at Haapavaara, Sharov's 662nd was stopped at the shores of Lake Piespajärvi by the Finnish 16th Battalion under Major Palari. Outnumbered, Palari held off the Soviet advance and started a counter-offensive on December 8th that managed to throw the invaders on the defensive. Palari himself was wounded though, and Colonel Paavo Sissidaival took command of the battalion, quickly forming Task Force Susi north of Palovaara. Their objective was to recapture Palovaara and from there move on to take back the main Soviet supply route through Yundisranta. On December 11th, Sissidaival intercepted a radio transmission from which the Finns learned that the 662nd had lost 10% of their forces from frostbite and that reinforcements were not coming to aid them. Sissidaival then sent the 16th Battalion to take Palovaara, but the Finns faced heavy resistance and only managed to take the crossroads by December 13th. On December 14th, as Sissidaival was preparing for the counter-offensive, Sharov launched an ill-advised attack towards Ketola village. The Soviets were defeated, losing 150 more men and had to retreat. Desperate, they started moving southwards, trying to link up with Zelentsev's forces at Suomussalmi, but they were stopped by the 16th Battalion at Palovaara. Furthermore, Sissidaival chased them from behind and surrounded them. In an act of cowardice, Sharov abandoned his men and escaped back to the Soviet Union. The 662nd fought tenaciously, but only 300 men managed to retreat to Yundisranta. When they finally reached friendly soil, they saw their courage rewarded with the execution of Sharov. On December 22nd, Dukhanov was replaced by Commander Vasily Choykov due to his incompetence. Despite the fact that most of the 44th was still in transit.
Yeah, this is not a time period where the Soviet Union is very forgiving of failures, right? The military hierarchy in the Soviet Union is going through a rapid change right here. It had been for a whole little bit going into this conflict. The response of the Soviet Union hierarchy, or really Stalin, was the same as it had been, with the purge, and that was that essentially, if you failed, you were probably going to die.
Choykov ordered Zelentsev and the 44th's commander, Alexei Vinogradov, to commence a simultaneous assault on the Finns, trying to gain a breakout. In the end, Zelentsev started the attack alone on December 24th and was forced to halt it by Christmas. Meanwhile, General Mannerheim reinforced Selasvuo with the 9th Division to prepare for a final assault on Suomussalmi. As the 44th was amassing at the Rate Road in front of the Finns, Selasvuo decided to use his forces to attack Zelentsev from the northwest of the village. 4 battalions were assigned to Task Force Kari under Major Kalle Kari for this assault. On December 27th, the operation started, with Kari's forces advancing over the frozen lake Oraviselka towards Holkoniemi. There, Kari was halted by Zelentsev's 81st Regiment, and a chaotic struggle ensued. By night, the 81st had suffered many casualties, retreating back to Suomussalmi to regroup with the 163rd. The Soviets continued to offer fierce resistance until the early hours of the morning, but the Finns could tell they were starting to break. As the battle was quickly turning against them, Soviet High Command finally authorized Zelentsev to retreat back to Yundisranda. On the night of December 28th, the Soviets started crossing the frozen lake Kyantyarbi to the north. A day later, only a small force remained in the village. They were destroyed by Kari, who managed to successfully reoccupy Suomussalmi. Salasvuo's offensive had been a success, and just in time, as the 44th had at last assembled on the Rate road. As Salasvuo had taken the initiative and Sisydaivel was marching his forces to take Yundisranda, Vinogradov felt as scared as his men were for the situation they were in. His division was highly mechanized and didn't have enough room to maneuver on the small forest road. His Ukrainian men didn't know how to ski, and the forest spoke Finnish as the enemy fell on them. For him, it was a deadly trap to be on the Rate road, so he asked permission to withdraw, but the High Command...
The forest spoke Finnish is a good line. Yeah, that's one of the things. There are, and I've talked about this, there are a lot of things that play into the Soviet Union's favor with this war. Almost everything, honestly. But the fact that the Finns are fighting on home territory, they're fighting for home territory, they know the layout. There's a different mindset going into the fight for the Finns than there is for the Soviet Union. And even though there is fear on the Soviet Union side for failure, the fear of failure is entirely different for the Finnish nation because they're afraid they will lose the Finnish nation. So the resistance that they put up is an extremely hardened and bitter resistance across the board. And even though they're wildly outnumbered and, they don't have near as many supplies and things like that, they know the terrain better. They tactically pick their spots on where to hit very well. They have defensive lines that work well. It's just an all-around good overall strategy for a power that is going up against a country that is far bigger and has far more resources than they do.
Command wouldn't allow him. On December 30th, General Twompo ordered Salasvuo to destroy the 44th Division, reinforcing him with the 1st Sissy Battalion of specialized ski troops. As soon as the 9th soldiers had rested after the fearsome battle, Salasvuo started to send them to reinforce Mäkiniemi's position. Sissy was placed southwest behind the front, with the objective of looping around the enemy lines and attacking towards the town of Haukala, while Kari was ordered to circle towards Alavoki, proceeding in the direction of Rate from the southeast. On January 1st, Mäkiniemi launched a frontal attack against Haukala, where Vinogradov's main forces were concentrated. By afternoon, Sissy suffered heavy losses while attempting their objective and would have to be recalled, but one of Mäkiniemi's battalions managed to advance through the road undetected and capture the Soviet artillery on the road. Vinogradov launched one counterattack after another, but he couldn't dislodge the Finns from their positions. By the end of the day, he was forced to take up a hedgehog defensive formation, placing the 146th Regiment in defense of the southern flank. At this point, Kari had reached the frozen lake Vuokkijärvi and was planning to attack the following day. Near Sanginaho, the entrenched 146th managed to repel Kari's attempts to break through, but with their supply route compromised, Vinogradov's forces started to starve. Furthermore, the freezing weather was inflicting a heavy toll on the 44th's strength, and whenever the Soviets started a campfire to warm themselves, the Finns would open fire with their machine guns from the forests. On January 3rd, Task Force Kari was assigned to assault the town of Sanginlampi, the main base of the 146th. As their initial assault failed, Kari decided to encircle the Soviet position with a pincer movement the following day. The Finns slowly progressed through the Soviet defences, causing them 300 casualties before their foes' withdrawal. With Sanginlampi under his control, Kari defeated a tank counterattack and advanced a few kilometers to the north of the town. Food and ammunition were running low for the Soviets. The 100.
Yeah, so you can see here, this is a very dangerous situation for the Soviets, even if they have food and supplies in the amount that they need. They do not. They do not have food and supplies in the amount that they need. They have soldiers that are freezing to death. And with all of that, this is an extremely dangerous and precarious situation. They really need that flank guarded. The one that just retreated, they really need it guarded. This puts them in a very bad spot.
And 46th had been pushed back to the road, and the Finns were constantly harassing them. Meanwhile, reinforcements arrived from Yundisranda to relieve Mäkiniemi's forces. Salasvuo knew the situation was ideal, and so he gave orders to encircle and destroy the enemy in the area between Lake Kokojabi and Haukila using a tactic known as Moti. For these attacks, the Finns ploughed winter roads through the snow away from the enemy positions. These functioned as jumping-off points, allowing the defenders to mass troops together quickly and undetectably. Although the Finns failed to occupy the Ratte Road as planned, the Soviets were now surrounded both from the north and south, so they couldn't withdraw or move from their positions. On January 6th, a battalion of the 9th managed to capture a section of the road near Lake Kokojabi and immediately dug in defensive positions.
Yikes.
Later that day, Kari managed to sever the road west from the battalion and then take the Soviet artillery at Kokojabi. At this point, Haukila had been completely encircled in a Moti, and Salasvuo commanded his forces to cut the Ratte Road at multiple points, creating several smaller Moti. In the end, Vinogradov had no other choice but to retreat eastwards towards Lake Kokojabi, even in spite of High Command's orders to fight to the last man. The Soviets gathered on the road for one last chaotic breakout attempt, suffering heavy casualties against Finnish machine gun fire. But at Kokojabi, the Soviets found that Kari had taken this position and was waiting for them. The 44th troops were soon defeated and fled into the woods in desperation. Meanwhile, Choikov had sent the 305th Rifle Regiment to rescue Vinogradov's men. They cleared a 9-kilometer channel from the border into Finland, enabling the Soviet soldiers that managed to flee to the forests to successfully escape. By January the 7th, the Ratte Road was completely in Finnish hands. Mäkiniemi's men alone had captured more than 1,000 prisoners that day, and the 44th Division had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The loss of more than 4,000 men and much equipment, including vehicles and horses, was a heavy blow to the Red Army. The Soviet High Command's decision of
Yeah, you can go look at the particulars, like the more in-depth look at that particular part of the conflict, the fight for the road. It is brutal. I mean, it is literally just awful. The Soviet soldiers are, starving and freezing, and they're running out of ammo, and they're encircled in these small groups. It's just, it's awful.
Maintaining the 44th in its place while Zelentsev retreated was a huge mistake, and although Vinogradov had wanted to retreat from the start, he would pay for that mistake with his life. Meanwhile, Mannerheim awarded Salasvuo and his men with his gratitude as this great victory was celebrated in Helsinki. But the war wasn't over. In the far north, another operation was taking place at the same time. Commander Valerian Frolov and his 14th Army invaded the area around Petsamo on November 30th, trying to cut off Finland's only Arctic port. Furthermore, Frolov was supported by the 122nd Rifle Division of the 9th Army, striking towards central Lapland. The port of Petsamo had been placed under the defense of Task Force Pennanen, a small unit with the strength of 3 companies. Captain Antti Pennanen and his men were barely holding their ground against the might of Frolov's 52nd Rifle Division, but the Soviet advance was slowed down due to temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius. Realizing he didn't have enough men to defend Petsamo, Pennanen retreated south and started a tiring campaign of attrition against the 14th Army. Frolov had successfully achieved his objective of taking Petsamo and the nickel ore mines of the region, but his new orders to push south saw his army constantly harassed by small Finnish raiding parties. By the end of the year, the relentless winter and sniper attacks had completely halted Frolov's advance. Further south, Colonel Peter Shevchenko's 122nd Division was rapidly progressing towards the town of Sala. Shevchenko's objective was to capture the capital of the Lapland region, Rovaniemi, and then advance to the port of Tornio on the Gulf of Bothnia. In response, General Tuompo had assigned the defense of the village to Major Vilho Roininen. Task Force Roininen had been hastily retreating from the border ever since Shevchenko started his advance. He knew that his force was no match against the 122nd, and despite receiving reinforcements on December 6th, he would have to surrender the town 3 days later. As Tuompo's main forces were in the region of Suomussalmi, and he had his full attention on that front, on December 13th, defense of the Lapland region was assigned to a separate force, Group Lapland, led by General Kurt Wallenius. Wallenius quickly decided that the Soviet advance had to be stopped, and so he started forming a defensive line in front of the town of Kemijärvi. While Wallenius tried to call on reinforcements, he placed Roininen, who had by now mustered 4 battalions, as the main defense unit on Lake Jotsajärvi. By December 15th, Shevchenko believed that the Finns weren't able to build a strong defense in the region, and with the reinforcement of the 273rd Mountain Rifle Regiment, he decided to split his forces. He sent the 273rd towards a northerly route past Pelkoseniemi village, with the objective of cutting off the supply routes of the Finnish forces still fighting in the Petsamo region. Meanwhile, he would lead the 122nd to directly assault Kemijärvi. Despite their defences, the Finns were worryingly struggling with the 273rd's drive northward. In response, Wallenius got the command of the 40th Regiment and placed it at Pelkoseniemi. But by the time the 40th arrived at the village, it was already too late, with the 273rd ferry crossing the Kitenen River to the north edge of Pelkoseniemi and establishing a bridgehead. On December 17th, the two forces chaotically clashed at the bridgehead. Despite the Finns' well-thought-out counterattacks, the Soviets pushed forward tenaciously, and eventually 2 tanks broke the Finnish line. But as the Finns were fleeing, the Soviets were suddenly hit by an undetected Finnish relief force that managed to rout them with ease. As the invaders began to retreat,
this is actually a pretty good, at least in my opinion, this is actually a pretty good overall strategy for this part of the line from the Soviets, as far as going around and flanking the supply line and getting the Finns that are holding ground in the north and really causing trouble to have to pull back. Reconnaissance is something that comes up over and over and over in this war as a major issue. It hurts the Soviet Union every which way during the whole conflict, and this is another one of those things. The Soviet Union doesn't believe that the Finns have had an opportunity to muster any sort of defense, and so then they split their forces. Like I said, the overall idea is a good one, but the reconnaissance for it is just bad.
Leaving behind precious equipment, Wallenius felt relieved that the 273rd's advance had been stopped and that Pelkoseniemi was secure. The 273rd would go on to retreat back to Saya village, where they wouldn't be a threat for the remainder of the war. From December 17th onwards, the 122nd launched repeated attacks on Roininen's forces, but the Finns held firm. On December 20th, Shevchenko split his forces across a 3-pronged attack that would encircle and then crush the Finnish defences. But Roininen was prepared for this, and he commanded a limited counterattack on the south side of Lake Jotsajärvi that sent the Soviets packing. Shevchenko's assault had failed miserably, with his forces ending up encircled in a motte. On December 21st, Shevchenko was ordered to establish a temporary defensive position in order to regroup and prepare for another attack. But Wallenius wouldn't allow his foe to regroup. he reinforced Rheininem and prepared to break the Soviet lines on January 2nd. The Finnish assault was a failure, and this prompted Shevchenko to attempt a breakthrough 3 days later. Choykov tried to reinforce the 122nd with the 88th Rifle Division, but on January 13th he realized these forces wouldn't arrive on time, and so he ended up ordering Shevchenko to withdraw back to Lake Makayarby at Sala. The Soviet forces proceeded to fortify their positions on the west bank of the lake, while the Finns set their own troops into an extended semicircle in front of these defences, preparing to recapture their town. Wallenius placed Task Force SFK in command of the operation, a force composed of Swedish and Norwegian volunteers led by the Swedish general Ernst Linde. Linde managed to repel any further attacks by the Soviets, but he lacked sufficient men to encircle and destroy the 122nd. Sala would remain in control of the Soviets for the remaining.
How many Swedes came and fought? I know that the Swedish government was not willing to get involved in the war. That's kind of a long-standing thing that Sweden has as far as getting involved in conflicts. But with the volunteer forces, how many of them were there? I'm just curious. This is the first time they've popped up in the video, so.
Remainder of the war, but the Lapland group would see complete success in their objective of containing the invaders. The loss of Petsamo and the nickel ore mines was a hard one for the Finns, but the Lapland and Oulu regions had remained largely untouched, and that was celebrated back in Helsinki as a great victory. Once again, thanks to Conflict of Nations for.
Okay, so that was the third Winter War video. I will get the fourth out tomorrow. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.